Where the grey won, the young woman was saying as the Duke of Orrindale came unheard to the garden door, the oldest, plainest grey. If Papa's grand guest is another fortune-hunting boor come to inspect me like a mare at auction, I would sooner send him running at the sight of a governess than charm him in silk. Let him think me poor and dull. It saves everyone a great deal of trouble. Julian Hale, 4th Duke of Orrindale, stopped where he stood on the terrace and did not announce himself, because he had not laughed in 3 months and he was suddenly, unexpectedly, on the edge of it. He had come to this house, Marlow Grange, a respectable country seat, its master an old friend of his late father's, for the most tedious of reasons. He was 36, unwed and hunted. Since inheriting, he had been pursued through every ballroom in England by mothers and daughters who saw not a man but a coronet, and he had grown so weary of being wanted for his title that he had begun to despair of ever being wanted at all. His friend Sir Edmund Fane had written to say his eldest daughter was a sensible, unaffected girl who did not care 2 straws for rank, and Julian, who no longer believed such a creature existed, had come chiefly to prove his friend a fond and deluded father. And now, through the garden door, he had overheard the sensible daughter plotting to repel him in her worst gown. He should have been offended. A duke deliberately met wit with an insult. Instead, he stood on the terrace and felt something he had not felt in years lift in his chest, the giddy, disbelieving relief of a man who has walked 100 miles across a desert and lost the sound of water. He did not go in by the garden door. He went round to the front and let himself be announced properly, and he said nothing to Sir Edmund of what he had overheard. And when the family assembled to receive their grand guest, and Miss Beatrice Fane came down the stair in a grey gown so old and plain and deliberately unbecoming that her poor mother visibly despaired, Julian rose and bowed over her hand with perfect gravity, and said, "Miss Fane, what a very sensible gown. I congratulate you on it. Silk is a great deal of fuss for a country afternoon." He watched her eyes fly to his in alarm, watched her realize he had understood exactly what the gown was for, and watched her, to her enormous credit, decide not to be ashamed of it. "I am glad your grace approves," Beatrice said, recovering with a spirit he admired. "I find silk encourages a person to be someone she is not. I would rather be dull and myself than dazzling and false." "Beatrice," her mother breathed, mortified. "No, no," Julian said, and he could not quite keep the warmth from his voice. "Let her speak. I find I have not heard anyone speak plainly to me in a very long time. It is more refreshing than you can imagine, madam. They did not tell her who he truly was. That was the mischief of it, and Julian, who had spent joyless months being a coronet, could not resist. He had come, you see, incognito, or nearly so. Sir Edmund had introduced him to the household only as Mr. Hale, a gentleman of my acquaintance, meaning to spring the ducal surprise later, over dinner, for maximum effect, and Julian, seeing his chance, quietly begged his old friend to keep the secret a while longer. "Let me," he said, "for once in my life be met as a man and not a title." Sir Edmund, amused, agreed. So for 3 days the Duke of Orrindale was simply Mr. Hale, a guest of no particular importance, and Beatrice Fane, believing him a mere gentleman of modest means and no threat to her freedom, treated him accordingly, which is to say, honestly. She showed him the orchard and the beehive she kept herself. She argued with him, gloriously, about a book they had both read, and did not once soften her opinion to flatter him. She wore her plainest gowns without apology, because Mr. Hale was no one she needed to impress. She was clever and unguarded and entirely, luminously herself, and Julian Hale, who had been loved for his coronet by 100 women, and known by none of them, fell in love in 3 days with a woman in a worn grey dress who did not know he was a duke and would not have altered a syllable if she had. On the 3rd evening they walked in the dusk-lit garden, and she said, laughing, "You will think me terrible, Mr. Hale, but I am glad Papa's Grand Duke never came. They wrote that some Duke of Orrindale might visit to look me over. I dreaded it for a week. Imagine a great cold duke inspecting me for suitability, wanting a duchess to hang his jewels upon." She shook her head. "I should have been perfectly wretched, whereas these 3 days with you have been the happiest I have had in a year." Julian stopped walking. The days between deepened everything, and Julian, who had come meaning to stay a single night, found reasons to remain. On the second morning Beatrice took him out to the far meadow where the hives stood, and lifted the veil from a nervous face, his not hers. She was entirely unafraid, and laughed at him openly when he flinched from a drowsy bee. "You, Mr. Hale, are a coward," she declared, "and I shall tell everyone." "I am a great many things," Julian said, watching her move among the hives as though she owned the whole bright morning. "But I have never before been called a coward to my face by a woman in a mended apron, and I find I like it better than any compliment I have ever received." "That is a very strange thing to like." "I am a very strange man," he said, and meant it more than she could know. She showed him her account books that afternoon. She kept them herself, for her father's steward was old and half-blind, and when Julian remarked, honestly astonished, that they were better kept than his own man's, she went pink with a pleasure that had nothing of vanity in it. "Papa says a lady should not trouble herself with figures," she confided, "but someone must, and I would rather it were done well and by me than badly and by another. Do you think me unwomanly, Mr. Hale?" "I think you the most sensible creature I have ever met," Julian said. "And I have met a great many creatures who were not sensible at all, and wanted only to be admired." He thought of the ballrooms, the hunting mothers, the daughters who could not add a column of figures, but could calculate a coronet to the penny. "You cannot imagine how rare a thing you are." "I am not rare," Beatrice said, surprised. "I am only poor and past my first youth, and too plain-spoken for society. Mamma despairs of me." Julian looked at her a long moment. "Your mamma," he said, "is mistaken in every particular." But he did not explain himself, and she took it for the kindness of a modest gentleman, and did not guess that a duke had just told her she was worth more than every heiress in England. That night, alone in his room, Julian stood long at the window and did not sleep. He had come to Marlow Grange a hollow man, tired to his bones of being wanted for a thing he had not earned and could not take pride in. And in 2 days a girl in a worn grey gown had filled the hollow without once trying, without knowing who he was, without wanting anything from him at all. He thought, if I tell her now, it ends. She will remember every honest thing she said and be ashamed of it, and the honesty will die, and I will have killed the only true thing to happen to me in 3 years. So he did not tell her, not yet. He let himself have one more day of being merely a man she liked. It was, he would think afterward, the most selfish and the most necessary thing he had ever done. "Beatrice," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name, and it stopped her too. "I must tell you something, and I am afraid you will not forgive me for it." "That sounds very grave," she said, uncertain. "You are not married, I hope? Or a highwayman?" "Worse," said Julian. "I am the Duke of Orrindale." The garden went very quiet. He watched the words reach her, watched her go still, watched the colour rise in her face, and then to his dismay the light in it went out. "Oh," she said. She stepped back from him. "Oh, I see. Then this, all of this, 3 days, it was a game to you. You heard about the grey gown, I suppose. Papa told you, or you overheard, and you thought it a fine joke to come and watch the plain honest girl make a fool of herself over a Mr. Hale who did not exist." Her voice shook. "I have said 100 foolish things to you. I called you a great cold duke to your face. I said I was glad you had never come, and you let me go on. Beatrice, you must have laughed," she said, wretched, "at how easily I was taken in." "I have not laughed at you once," Julian said, and the force of it stopped her. "I have laughed with you 100 times in 3 days, which is more than I had laughed in 3 years before I came here, but never once at you. Beatrice, listen to me. Yes, I overheard you. I stood at the garden door on the first day and heard you plotting to send the Grand Duke running in your worst grey gown, and do you know what I felt?" He took a step toward her. Relief. Such relief I nearly wept. "Because I have spent 3 years being wanted for a coronet by women who would have worn cloth of gold to snare me and not meant a word of it, and here at last was a woman who would put on her ugliest dress to drive a duke away. And I thought, if I could only be met once by someone who did not know, if I could only find out whether anyone in England could like plain Mr. Hale, who is no one, and could they?" Beatrice whispered. "You did," Julian said simply. "You liked a man of no fortune and no rank, and you argued with him, and showed him your bees, and wore your worst gowns without a blush, and were entirely yourself. Do you understand what that is worth to a man like me? I have been loved for my title all my life and known by no one. And in 3 days you knew me, the real man, the one under the coronet, and you liked him. Beatrice, I did not deceive you to laugh at you. I deceived you because it was the only way in the world to find out if I could be loved for myself. And I can. You proved it. You are the proof. Beatrice stood in the dusk, her worst grey gown gone silver in the fading light, and her eyes were bright. You truly heard the gown's speech, she said faintly, and you were glad of it. I was so glad of it, Julian said, that I am standing in your father's garden about to do a thing I have never once been tempted to do in 3 joyless years of being hunted. Beatrice Fane, I do not want a duchess to hang jewels upon. I have had my fill of women who wanted the jewels. I want the woman who would wear an ugly grey gown to save herself from a coronet. I want you, as you are, in whatever you please to wear, or nothing grander than that grey for the rest of my life. Will you have plain Mr. Hale, who is, most inconveniently, also a duke? Beatrice looked at him for a long moment, and then the light came back into her face, brighter than before, and she began helplessly, gloriously, to laugh. I wore my very worst gown, she said, to drive you away, and drove me straight into love instead, said Julian. It was a catastrophic failure. I congratulate you on it. My mother will never recover, Beatrice said. She will say I caught a duke in a rag. Then we shall let her say it, Julian answered, for it will be the truth, and it is the finest thing anyone has ever done to me. And he took her hand, her real, ungloved, honest hand, and did not let it go. They were married in the autumn, and Beatrice wore silk after all. But only because she chose to, and only because her husband whispered, as she came up the aisle, that she looked well in it, but he would love her the same in sackcloth, which made her laugh, so that half the church wondered what the grave Duke of Orrindale could possibly have said to his bride. The story of the grey gown became a family legend, told and retold and never quite believed by those who had not been there. But the Duke and Duchess of Orrindale knew it was true, and they treasured it, and on their every anniversary, for all the long and happy years of their marriage. Beatrice would take from a chest the oldest, plainest grey gown, worn thin now and carefully mended, and hang it where her husband could see it. And Julian, who had once been the loneliest coronet in England, would look at that shabby grey dress, and take his wife's hand, and thank whatever fortune had guided him to a garden door on a summer afternoon, in time to overhear the one woman in all the world who had never wanted the jewels, only the man beneath them, whom she had loved without ever knowing he was a duke at all.